The gun pressed into the back of Maya Carter's skull at 2:17 in the morning, and she didn't flinch, didn't beg, didn't make a sound. She stood perfectly still while Dale Pruitt laughed behind her while his two men blocked every exit while the whole hallway smelled like alcohol and unchecked power. They thought she was trapped. They thought she was alone. They didn't see Rex drop his weight in the dark behind them, silent locked, coiled like a decision that had already been made. They had 1 second to understand what they'd walked into. They didn't use it. If stories like this hit different for you, subscribe right now, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see exactly how far Maya's story travels. If this is the kind of story that makes your blood run hot and your hands grip your seat, you're in the right place. Subscribe right now, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The moment the barrel touched the back of Maya Carter's head, 3 things happened simultaneously. Her breathing slowed. Her hands opened, palms out, fingers spread, every instinct in her body performing the calculations it had been trained for over 8 years of active service. And Rex, 74 pounds of muscle discipline and absolute loyalty, stopped mid-step, dropped his center of gravity 2 inches, and turned his head exactly 45 degrees toward the man holding the gun. Not barking, not lunging, watching. The man with the gun. Staff Sergeant Dale Pruitt laughed. It was the kind of laugh that lived in locker rooms and back hallways, the kind that needed an audience to survive. And tonight he had one. 2 of them. Corporals Hank Weston and Joey Brandt stood behind him, arms crossed, smirking like they'd rehearsed this. Maybe they had. "You gonna tell me to back off again, Carter?" Pruitt said. His voice dropped low, doing that thing men do when they want to sound dangerous instead of just drunk. "Because I think your little dog's confused about who's in charge around here." Maya didn't answer immediately. She was counting. Not seconds, she was counting his breathing pattern, his grip pressure, the exact tremor in his wrist that told her he was on his 3rd or 4th drink of the night. She was reading him the way she'd been trained to read every hostile environment she'd ever walked into. And what she read was this: he was scared. Scared men with guns were the most dangerous kind. "Pruitt," her voice came out flat, controlled, not a single note of the fear that was absolutely alive in her chest. "You're going to want to lower that." "Or what?" Weston chimed in from the back. "Your discharge paper's gonna attack us." The laughter hit like a slap, because that was the thing about this unit, they knew exactly where to aim. So, 6 weeks earlier, Maya Carter had arrived at the Naval Special Warfare Training Annex outside San Diego, with transfer papers, a rucksack, and Rex walking at her left heel like he always did. Quiet, precise, unbothered. She was the first female K-9 handler assigned to this particular unit. Bravo 7, a direct action team with 3 combat deployments, 4 commendations, and a reputation for being exactly the kind of men who didn't ask for help and didn't extend it either. The team leader, Commander Ellis Hatch, had shaken her hand with the energy of a man signing off on a requisition form. "Handler Carter, I've read your file." He paused. "Impressive. One word, delivered the way you'd describe a weather forecast." "Thank you, sir." "Rex's service record is also notable." Another pause. "We'll see how you both integrate." She'd understood what that meant. It wasn't a welcome. It was a test she hadn't agreed to take. The first week they ignored her. Locker assignments placed her in a separate corridor. Briefing handouts arrived to her last pages, sometimes missing. At meals, the conversation shifted, not stopping entirely, just pivoting just enough that she was always slightly outside it. Maya had lived through worse. She documented it, said nothing, and kept performing. The second week, it became something else. It started with Rex. Someone left the gate to his kennel unlatched twice. The first time, Rex sat exactly where he was supposed to and waited. He was trained to do that. The second time, Maya arrived at 05:30 to find Brandon standing outside the kennel, poking a stick through the chain link, making sounds with his mouth that he probably thought were commands. Rex was watching him with the expression of a professor forced to listen to someone read the dictionary out loud. Maya removed the stick from Brand's hand without a word and went inside to run Rex through his morning routine. "He's wasted on you," Brand said behind her. "Animal like that needs a real handler." She didn't turn around. Then maybe study harder and apply for the program. She heard him laugh. Then she heard him walk away. She filed the incident report that evening. It disappeared somewhere between her desk and Commander Hatch's office. She filed another one. Same result. By week 3, she understood the architecture of what was happening to her. This wasn't random hostility. It was a system. Pruitt at the top, 12 years and 3 deployments, the kind of unit credibility that turned bad behavior into institutional weather. Weston and Brandt below him, running support. And Hatch above, doing what leaders do when they want plausible deniability, nothing. Nothing loudly and consistently and with great paperwork efficiency. The night it escalated. For the first time, Maya was running a post-exercise debrief in the common room. Standard procedure, she documented Rex's alert patterns during the training scenario, identified 2 behavioral markers that could be refined, and was walking through her notes for the official record. Pruitt walked in halfway through, sat down across from her, poured himself coffee like she wasn't mid-sentence. "You know what your problem is, Carter." He didn't look up from his mug. "You think this is about being good at the job." She paused her debrief. "Isn't it? It's about fit." He finally looked at her. "And you don't fit." Rex lifted his head from across the room, just slightly. His eyes tracked to Pruitt and stayed there. "I have performance evaluations that suggest otherwise," Maya said evenly. "Evaluations." Pruitt smiled. "Right. See, evaluations are written by people. People who have to work with you after. People who talk to each other." He stood up, took his coffee. "You want to think about that." He left. Maya sat with it for a moment, the specific cold weight of a threat that never used threatening language. The kind that HR couldn't touch and a lawyer couldn't frame. She looked at Rex. He was still watching the door. "I know," she said quietly. "Me too." Down. Mini climax. 2 days later, she found her service file on the common room table. Open. Personal assessment pages face up. Someone had written 3 words across her psychological evaluation in red marker. "Doesn't belong here." Her hands didn't shake when she picked it up. She photographed it with her phone. Then she walked it directly to Commander Hatch's office and placed it on his desk without speaking. Hatch looked at it for a long moment. "I'll look into it," he said. Maya looked at him. "Sir, with respect, you've said that before." Handler Carter. 3 incident reports. 2 kennel violations. 1 documented threat to my operational credibility. And now this. She kept her voice completely level. "I'm asking you directly, Commander. Is this unit capable of professional conduct? Or am I documenting a pattern for an outside review?" The room went very quiet. Hatch's jaw tightened. "That kind of language doesn't help your integration." "Integration." She repeated the word. Let it sit there between them for a second. "Is that what this is?" She picked up the file, walked out. That night, she called her JAG contact for the first time. But here's what nobody in Bravo 7 understood about Maya Carter. She wasn't there to be accepted. She was there because 6 months earlier, she had been pulled from a Black Ops mission in a country she still couldn't name, in official documents, pulled out of an operation that went catastrophically wrong, that cost the lives of 2 operators and a 4-year-old K-9 named Coda, who had been her first partner, and she had been quietly blamed for a call she didn't make. The official report cited handler error. The unofficial version, which every person in that building knew, was more complicated, more political, more damaging to more powerful people than anyone was willing to admit on paper. She had been reassigned instead of court-martialed because a court-martial would have required discovery, and discovery would have been catastrophic for the people above her. Maya knew this. She had spent 4 months after the incident building a file of her own, not out of anger, not out of bitterness, out of the same methodical discipline she applied to everything else. Reading the environment, identifying the threat, preparing the appropriate response. Rex had been the only K-9 to survive that operation. He'd been assigned to her afterwards. She didn't know if that was coincidence or institutional guilt or some quartermaster's administrative decision. But the first morning he sat at her left heel, she'd understood something. They were the same. Both of them had been in the building when it fell. Both of them had walked out. And both of them were still performing at the highest level because that was the only language that meant anything in this world. She hadn't come back to fight. She'd come back to prove the record wrong. And Pruitt, drunk, threatened, surrounded by his two-man audience, was standing directly in the way of that. "Lower the weapon, Pruitt." She said it again, still flat, still controlled. But something had changed in her voice, a precision entering it, like a tool being picked up from a work table. "Or what? Carter, you're going to report me." He moved closer, barrel still pressed to the base of her skull. "Who do you think they're going to believe? 12-year operator with 3 combat deployments. Or the woman with documentation going back 6 weeks," she said. "I know, I've thought about it too." Something shifted in his breathing. She caught it, the micro-hesitation. Weston moved from his position on the left. "She's bluffing." "Am I?" It wasn't a question. She said it the way someone states coordinates. 6 weeks of incident reports, photographs, JAG consultation, and a very thorough understanding of the UC, MJ articles that cover exactly what is happening in this room right now. Brandt made a sound, not quite a laugh, something more uncertain. "Put the gun away," she said. "Walk away, and I will give you exactly 24 hours to think about whether the trajectory you are currently on is the one you want to be on." Pruitt's hand trembled. Just once. Just barely. Rex moved not forward. Not yet. He repositioned his weight to his back haunches, and the sound that came from him wasn't a bark. It was something lower, more ancient. The sound a predator makes when it's done being patient. Every person in that room heard it. Weston stepped back. Brandt said, "Dale, shut up," Pruitt snapped. But the energy in the room had changed. Maya could feel it, the exact moment when a bluff becomes a calculation and a calculation becomes a choice. "Last time," she said softly, "lower it." The gun stayed where it was for 3 more seconds. Then Pruitt made his choice. And everything that happened next, every consequence, every reckoning, every truth that had been buried in this unit for 12 years, began moving like a freight train with no more brakes. Matar. What the 3 men didn't know, what they couldn't have known, was that Maya had not come to this confrontation unprepared. She had known this moment was coming. Not this exact moment, not this specific hallway at 2:17 in the morning. But she had known the way you know a storm is coming when you can read weather, that the pressure building in this unit was going to find a release point. She had known it the day she filed the first report that disappeared. She had known it the day she found her file on that table. So she had prepared. Not the way scared people prepare, stockpiling grievances, building resentments, rehearsing arguments. She had prepared the way operators prepare, which is methodically and without emotion, accounting for every variable and building contingencies for each one. Her phone on her person right now had been recording since she entered this corridor. 47 minutes of audio. And the moment Pruitt pressed that barrel to her skull, the moment the recording captured the unmistakable sound of a loaded weapon making contact with a human being, Maya Carter had already won. She just had to survive the next 60 seconds. Rex pressed his flank against the back of her knee. Not a lunge, not an attack, a signal. "I'm here. I'm ready. Your call." Maya Carter took a breath, held it, and said one final time, quiet as a door closing, "Back off now." The gun didn't move. That was the thing Maya would remember later. Not the cold of the barrel, not the sound of her own heartbeat, but the fact that Dale Pruitt stood there for 4 full seconds after her final warning and chose to keep it exactly where it was. 4 seconds is a long time when you're trained to read them. In the first second, she confirmed his grip hadn't tightened. He wasn't going to pull the trigger. Not because he was decent, but because some survival instinct buried beneath the alcohol and the ego was whispering to him that something in this hallway wasn't adding up the way he'd planned. In the second, she heard Brandt shift his weight behind her. Heel to toe. The sound of a man reconsidering his position without admitting he's doing it. In the third second, Rex exhaled slow and deliberate, and the sound of it in that corridor was somehow louder than anything else. In the fourth second, Pruitt said, "You think that recording means anything?" And Maya understood 2 things simultaneously. He had spotted the phone, and he had just confirmed on tape that he knew he was being recorded. She almost smiled. Almost. "It means exactly what it sounds like," she said. "A weapon, my skull, your voice. 47 minutes of everything that led here." She paused 1 beat. "You want to keep going, or you want to make the smart decision for the first time tonight?" Weston moved first, not toward her away. 2 steps back toward the corridor exit, arms dropping from their crossed position, the body language of a man quietly removing himself from a situation he no longer wanted his name attached to. She cataloged that. Weston would be the first to cooperate when this went to review. Men who step back first and always are. Brandt said, "Dale, man," I said, "Shut up." But Pruitt's voice had changed. The performance was leaking out of it. What was left underneath was smaller, tighter. The voice of someone doing arithmetic and not liking the answers. The barrel lifted from her skull, not smoothly, not with any dignity. It came up in a jerky sideways motion, and Pruitt stepped back and pointed it at the floor and then shoved it into his holster like the weapon had personally offended him. Maya turned around. She did it slowly, deliberately, because the way you turn around after something like that matters. It tells everyone in the room, including yourself, exactly who just won. She looked at Pruitt directly, took him in the red in his face, the sweat at his temple, the way his jaw was working, like he was chewing on words he couldn't quite form. Then she looked at Weston, who had found something extremely interesting to study on the wall beside him. Then at Brandt, who at least had the decency to look ashamed. "Get some sleep," she said. All three of them. Quiet as a verdict. Then she walked back to her quarters with Rex at her heel, and she did not look back once. The moment her door closed, her hands started shaking. She sat on the edge of her bunk and pressed both palms flat against her thighs and breathed the way she'd been taught to breathe when the body was running hot and the mind needed to catch up. 4 counts and hold, 4 release, 4. Rex put his head in her lap without being asked. He always knew. From the beginning, from the very first morning, she'd clipped his lead after Coda died. He had always known exactly when to come close. "I've got it," she whispered to him, to herself. "I've got all of it." Because she did. The recording was already uploaded. She had set it to auto-transfer to a secure cloud account the moment she entered that corridor. 47 minutes and change of audio evidence that would take a JAG attorney approximately 20 minutes to categorize and approximately 20 more to turn into the beginning of the end of Dale Pruitt's career. She should have felt relief, maybe triumph. Instead, what she felt was exhausted in the specific way that comes not from physical effort, but from spending years being exactly right about exactly the wrong things. She had known this unit was going to break. She had documented it, prepared for it, survived it. And now the recording existed, and Pruitt's career was functionally over, and the truth was going to come out not just about tonight, but about all of it. About Bravo 7. About Commander Hatch's deliberate inaction. About the institutional machinery that kept swallowing women's incident reports and calling it integration. She should have felt something cleaner than this. Instead, she pulled out her phone, looked at the upload confirmation, and thought about Coda. The way he used to press his nose against the back of her hand during briefings when she was stressed. The way he had moved through that building in the dark, sure, fearless, trusting her completely, right up until the moment the ceiling came down. Rex lifted his head and looked at her. "Yeah," she said softly. "I know." She sent the file to Lieutenant Commander Sharon Vega, her JAG contact, with a message that contained exactly 4 words. "It happened. Call me." Then she lay back on her bunk with Rex alongside her and waited for dawn. She didn't sleep. Neither did Dale Pruitt, though, for very different reasons. What she didn't know, lying there in the dark, counting her own breathing, was that the situation she'd just survived was about to become significantly more complicated. Because Pruitt, drunk and cornered and desperate in the particular way that powerful men get desperate when they feel their power actually slipping, had made a phone call of his own, not to a lawyer, to a man named Colonel Warren Taft. And that phone call, made at 2:34 in the morning, voice low and urgent, was the first move in a chess game that Maya hadn't known she was already sitting across the board from. She found out at 0600. The knock on her door was Commander Hatch. He was in full uniform, which told her this wasn't casual. Behind him stood a man she didn't recognize, civilian clothes, military posture, the specific stillness of someone who worked in spaces that didn't appear on organizational charts. "Handler Carter," Hatch said. "We need to talk." She was already dressed. She had been since 0430. "Sir." She stepped aside and let them in. Rex moved to the far corner of the room and sat, eyes tracking the civilian with the focus of a targeting system. The civilian didn't introduce himself. He sat down in the chair by her desk, her chair, which told her something about how he'd been briefed, and folded his hands and looked at her the way you look at a problem you've been hired to solve. I understand there was an incident last night, he said. The voice was neutral, processed. The voice of a man who had done this before and would do it again. There was, Maya said. She kept her eyes on him, not on Hatch. A superior officer placed a loaded firearm against my skull. I have 47 minutes of audio documentation. Not a flicker. That was interesting. These things can be complicated, the civilian said. Maya felt something go very still inside her. Can they? Operational units under stress, long deployments, personnel dynamics that are difficult to capture in incident reports. He spread his hands slightly. We'd like to resolve this internally, quietly, in a way that's beneficial to everyone, including Sergeant Pruitt, she said, including all parties. The non-answer of someone who'd practiced non-answers. Rex made a sound from the corner, not aggressive, just present. The civilian glanced at him, once then looked back at Maya. She understood now what this was. This wasn't Hatch's idea. Hatch wasn't capable of mobilizing a civilian operative before 0600. This had come from above Hatch, from wherever Pruitt's 234 phone call had landed, and it had come fast, which told her that whoever was protecting Pruitt had been ready to move, had been watching this situation, had known maybe that it was building toward exactly this. That realization settled into her chest like cold water. This wasn't just about a drunk sergeant with a gun. This was about something she'd stumbled into from a different direction entirely. I want to understand what you're offering, she said carefully. The civilian glanced at Hatch. Hatch found the floor. The civilian looked back at her. A lateral transfer, a positive performance notation. Rex remains assigned to you. All documentation from the past 6 weeks is sealed under operational security review. He paused. You move forward. The unit moves forward. And the recording would be covered under the same review. She stared at him. You want me to hand over the recording? We'd like you to understand that its unmanaged release could compromise ongoing operations that are significantly above your clearance level. He said it smoothly. Rehearsed, the way you present a threat when you've been trained to present it as a reasonable administrative concern. Her mind was running fast. Clearance level, ongoing operations. Pruitt had been on 3 deployments, all of them classified. Whatever Bravo 7 was actually doing in the field, whatever was in those mission files that had never crossed her desk, despite her being nominally part of the team, someone needed it to stay buried. And somehow her recording of a drunk sergeant threatening her with a firearm had become leverage in something much larger than one hallway in the middle of the night. She looked at the civilian for a long moment. Then she said, I'd like to contact my JAG representative. The civilian's expression didn't change. Of course. But something moved behind his eyes, just for a second, the micro-expression of a man recalibrating. Because here was what he didn't know, what neither he nor Hatch, nor Pruitt, nor whoever had made the phone call at 2:34 knew Maya had sent that file at 2:31, before she went to sleep, before any knock on any door, before any civilian in civilian clothes had been mobilized. Lieutenant Commander Sharon Vega had received it, flagged it, and forwarded it to the Naval Inspector General's office at 3:47 a.m. because Sharon Vega had been waiting for exactly this kind of file from exactly this unit for 8 months. Not because of Maya specifically, because of a pattern. 4 female personnel in Bravo 7's extended operational history, 4 transfers, 4 sealed files, 4 positive performance notations that preceded careers that quietly dissolved within 18 months of leaving the unit. Maya hadn't known that when she arrived. She hadn't known she was the 5th. She found out 40 minutes later, sitting across from Sharon Vega on a video call in a secure conference room with Rex at her feet and Commander Hatch pointedly excluded from the building. How long? Maya asked. Her voice was completely steady. She was running on no sleep and something that wasn't quite anger, something more precise than anger, something that had a shape. The pattern goes back 6 years, Sharon said. Her face on the screen was careful, professional, but Maya could hear it underneath the particular tension of someone who has been building toward a case and just watch the last piece fall into place. Taft has been the connecting thread. Every transfer, every sealed file. He's not protecting Pruitt specifically. Pruitt is just the most recent instrument. Protecting what then? A program, a specific series of operations that Bravo 7 has been running off book for 3 years. Sharon paused. The women who were transferred, they weren't transferred because they couldn't perform Maya. They were transferred because they were asking questions. Small questions, the kind that seem like operational curiosity and are actually the beginning of someone figuring out what's actually happening in the field. Maya thought about her missing briefing pages, the kennel violations, the way the hostility had been structured, not random, not personal, but systematic, designed to exhaust, designed to give someone a clean personnel rationale for removal. She thought about the operation where Coda died, the building in the country she couldn't name, the call she had supposedly made the handler error, that wasn't. She thought about who had written the mission parameters. Sharon, she said slowly, Bravo 7's third deployment, who drafted the operational framework. Silence on the other end, too long a silence. Sharon, I can't discuss that on this channel. Then I need to see you in person. Maya leaned forward, because I think this is connected. I think what happened to me 18 months ago and what's happening to me right now are the same story with the same people in it. And if I'm right, she stopped, breathed. If I'm right, the recording from last night is the smallest piece of this. On screen, Sharon Vega looked at her for a long moment. Then she said quietly and with great precision, "Can you be in my office by 1400? Yes. Bring everything, not just last night, everything you have from the past 18 months. Maya looked down at Rex. He was watching her with that absolute steadiness that she had come to understand was its own kind of communication. Not words, not signals, just the fundamental fact of his presence, which had always meant the same thing. I'm with you, whatever this is, I'm with you. Okay, she said, to Sharon, to Rex, to the shape of what was coming, which she could feel gathering on the other side of the horizon like weather, like the kind of storm that doesn't announce itself quietly. She ended the call, sat still for a moment. Then she opened her file, the real file, the one she kept encrypted on a drive that never touched a military network, and she began to go back through it, methodically, the way she did everything. Names, dates, mission designations, the operational framework of a deployment that had been blamed on her and signed off by people who already knew the truth. 1 hour in, she found it, a signature on a pre-mission assessment, a name she recognized not from Bravo 7, but from a congressional hearing she had watched from a hospital bed 18 months ago, 3 weeks after the building fell. Her hand stopped moving. Rex was at her side before she'd registered standing up. She looked at the name on the document, read it twice, then a third time. Because if this signature meant what she thought it meant, if the chain of accountability she was looking at ran where she thought it ran, then Dale Pruitt pressing a gun to her skull last night had been the least dangerous thing that happened to her in the past 18 months. And the people she was about to put this in front of were going to have a choice, let the truth out cleanly or try to stop it. She already knew which one they would choose. She was ready for that too. She closed the file clip, Rex's lead, and walked out the door toward whatever came next. Not running, not hesitating, just moving forward with the particular steadiness of a person who has already decided that the only direction worth moving in is straight through the fire. The drive to Sharon Vega's office took 40 minutes. Maya spent all 40 of them in silence, Rex in the backseat, her encrypted drive in her jacket pocket, like a live grenade she was carrying very carefully with both hands. She had found the name at 0847. By 0900, she had cross-referenced it against 3 separate documents in her file, the pre-mission assessment, a logistics authorization from the same week, and a personnel memo she had initially cataloged as routine administrative correspondence and almost deleted 6 months ago. Almost. Some instinct had told her to keep it, and she had learned a long time ago to trust that instinct, the way she trusted Rex completely, and without needing to understand exactly why. The name was Congressman Gerald Marsh, senior member of the House Armed Services Committee, 12 years in office, impeccable national security credentials, the kind of man whose name appeared on defense appropriations bills and veterans legislation, and the kind of patriotic press releases that made local news in election years. His signature was on the pre-mission operational framework for the deployment where Coda died. Not as oversight, not as committee review. As a direct participant in the mission's strategic design, which was not something a sitting congressman was authorized to do, not under any framework Maya had ever been trained on, not under any legal structure she could find in 4 hours of searching after she'd gotten back from that hospital. She had buried it at the time because she was 29 years old and recovering from a collapsed lung, and she had been officially blamed for the mission's failure, and she had understood, with a clarity that left no room for comfort, that nobody in any position of authority was going to help her prove otherwise. So she had kept the document, put it in the encrypted file, and she had come back. Not for revenge. She had told herself that so many times it had become true, the way things become true, when you repeat them with enough intention and enough discipline. Not for revenge, for the record. Because the record was wrong, and wrong records have a way of killing people who haven't been killed yet. Sharon Vega met her at the door personally. That was the first signal that the 3:47 a.m. forward to the Naval Inspector General had landed harder than Maya had anticipated. The second signal was the man sitting at the conference table inside. Late 50s, civilian suit, but the posture of someone who had worn a uniform for a long time before the suit. A leather portfolio open in front of him, a yellow legal pad covered in handwriting, and the specific expression of a man who has been waiting for something and is now looking directly at it. "Handler Carter," Sharon said carefully, "this is Special Agent Dennis Rourke, Naval Criminal Investigative Service." Maya stood very still for exactly 1 second. Then she walked to the table and sat down, and Rex settled at her feet, and she looked at Rourke and said, "How long have you been working this?" Rourke looked at Sharon. Sharon sat down. Rourke looked back at Maya. 14 months, he said. She absorbed that. 14 months. She had been building her file for 18. They had been building theirs for 14. For 8 of those months, they had been running parallel, invisible to each other, pulling thread from opposite ends of the same knot. "The 4 women before me," she said. "We were aware of 3 of the 4 when you were assigned to Bravo 7, Rourke said. He said it without flinching, which she respected and also found infuriating. "We didn't flag your assignment because we didn't have confirmation that the pattern was deliberate versus systemic negligence. We needed, you needed another incident," she said. He didn't deny it. "We needed documented evidence of active suppression. What you sent at 2:31 this morning," he tapped his legal pad, "that changes the nature of what we have." "And Marsh," Maya said. The room went quiet in a specific way, the kind of quiet that happens when a name is larger than the space it's been set in. Rourke looked at her steadily. "What do you know about Marsh?" She pulled out the encrypted drive and set it on the table between them. "His signature is on the pre-mission framework for Operation Harrow, the deployment 18 months ago. The one where 2 operators and a K-9 died, and I was cited for handler error." Sharon inhaled quietly. Rourke didn't move. His eyes were on the drive. "You've had that for 18 months. "I had it, and I had no channel I trusted to bring it through," she said. "I was 29 and officially at fault for a mission that killed my partner, and I understood very clearly that the people with authority to investigate it were the people who needed it buried." She paused. "So I came back. I came back to Bravo 7, and I documented everything, and I waited for them to do exactly what they did because I knew they would, because they always do." Rourke looked at her for a long moment. Something shifted in his expression, not softness exactly, but recognition. The look of someone recalibrating not just their strategy, but their understanding of who they're sitting across from. "The 2:31 recording goes to obstruction, coercion, and criminal threatening," he said. "What's on that drive, if it holds what you're describing, goes to something significantly larger. Unauthorized congressional involvement in classified operational planning," Maya said. "And if the operational failure was predictable from the framework, which I believe it was, then there's an argument for criminal negligence resulting in the deaths of military personnel." She said it cleanly, without emotion in her voice, though the emotion was absolutely there, just running underneath, pressurized and controlled, the way everything in her ran. Rourke picked up his pen. "Walk me through it, everything. Start with the day you were assigned to Operation Harrow." She started talking. "It took 2 hours and 20 minutes. Rex slept through most of it, which she found obscurely comforting, his ability to rest when she needed to be sharp, his absolute trust that she had whatever was happening handled. She talked through the mission briefing the framework anomalies she had noticed, but been unable to question through proper channels, the night of the operation itself, the building coda, the two operators whose names were Marcus Webb and Darnell Pruitt, no relation to Dale and who had families that still believed their deaths were the result of a junior handler's error. She talked about the hospital, the official report, the language that had been used to describe her performance as deficient in ways that were specific enough to sound credible and vague enough to be impossible to disprove without the documents she had just placed on this table. She talked about coming back, about Bravo 7, about 6 weeks of documented harassment building toward 2:17 in the morning and a gun barrel, and a drunk man who had no idea he was the last piece of a structure that had been built long before he picked up that weapon. When she finished, the legal pad was full. Rourke had gone through 4 pages. Sharon had stopped taking notes somewhere around the 90-minute mark and was just listening, her hands flat on the table, her expression the careful neutral of a lawyer sitting with something bigger than she'd been prepared for. "The operative who directed you to make the call that night," Rourke said. "The call that was later cited as handler error." "Lieutenant Colonel Raymond Keyes," Maya said. "He gave me a direct verbal order to move Coda into the eastern corridor. I followed it. The ceiling came down on the eastern corridor 40 seconds later." She paused. "Keyes' after-action report stated that I had moved Coda without authorization." "Keyes is currently assigned to the Pentagon," Sharon said. She was looking at something on her tablet. "Senior advisor to the Joint Chiefs." Nobody said anything for a moment. Then Rourke closed his legal pad, and the sound of it closing was somehow final. Like a door. "I need to bring this up the chain today, this afternoon." He looked at Maya. "You understand that when this moves, it moves fast. And the people it moves toward have resources and institutional relationships that—" "I know what they have," Maya said. "I've been living inside their institutional relationships for 18 months. She met his eyes. "I know what I'm doing." Rourke nodded once, stood up, picked up the encrypted drive. "I'll need to copy this and return the original." "Keep the original," she said. "I have 3 copies in 3 separate locations." He almost smiled. "Of course you do." She drove back to base with Rex and the specific disorienting lightness of someone who has been carrying a weight for so long that the absence of it feels like a physical change in air pressure. She had handed it over. Not given it up, handed it over to the right people through the right channel with documentation solid enough to make the path forward real. She should have felt lighter. She felt watchful instead, because she had been right about one thing from the beginning: the people on the other end of this were going to choose to fight it. They always did. And they had moved fast this morning, the civilian in her quarters, before 0600 Taft mobilized overnight the offer of a clean transfer delivered like a business proposition. That speed told her something important. They were scared. Scared people with power and resources do not sit still. She was in the parking lot of the base annex Rexon lead when her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. Then she thought about the fact that unknown numbers had been part of this story since the beginning, and she picked up. "Carter." The voice on the other end was male, older, controlled in a way that didn't sound natural, the control of someone suppressing urgency. "You don't know me. My name is Thomas Webb. Marcus Webb was my son." Maya stopped walking. Rex stopped with her. The world went very quiet. "Mr. Webb," she said carefully, "I've been contacted by an investigator." His voice was steady, but she could hear what was underneath it. 18 months of grief that had been pointed in the wrong direction, and the particular raw quality of a man who was just now understanding that. "He told me there was new information about the operation, about what really happened." A breath. "He told me your name." She sat down on the hood of her car, just sat. Rex pressed against her leg. "Marcus was a good operator," she said, because that was the truest thing she could say, and it needed to be the first thing. "I know that." His voice cracked on the second word and held on the third. "They told us it was mismanagement, that a handler made a bad call. We believed them, Ms. Carter. For 18 months we believed them, and he stopped." She could hear him gathering himself. My wife stopped speaking at the dinner table. My daughter transferred colleges 3 times. We were angry at the wrong person. Mr. Webb, I'm not calling to apologize, he said quickly. I'm calling because the investigator said my testimony about the after-action briefing we received might matter. And I need to know if that's true. I need to know if this is real. Maya looked at the sky. The specific weight of 18 months pressed against her chest and then slowly shifted, not lifting but changing shape, becoming something she could carry differently. It's real, she said. Your testimony matters. What they told you matters. The way they delivered it, the specific language they used, it matters because it's part of the pattern, and patterns are what make a case instead of an allegation. Silence on the line. Then will you tell me what actually happened that night? She thought about it, about what he deserved to hear, about the Eastern Corridor and Coda and the 40 seconds and the sound of the building and the way Marcus Webb had been moving forward, professional, trusting the chain of command that had already decided his life was an acceptable operational variable. Yes, she said, I'll tell you everything. She talked for 40 minutes, the call that Thomas Webb was probably not supposed to make, that some investigator had taken a risk to enable. That was almost certainly going to become part of the official record before this week was out. She told him the truth in the exact specific language of someone who had rehearsed it only in her own head alone at 3 a.m. for 18 months. When she finished, Thomas Webb was quiet for a long time. Then he said, She's going to want to hear this too, Marcus's wife. Can I give her your number? Yes, Maya said, without hesitating. She hung up and sat on the hood of her car, and Rex put his head in her lap, and she let him. And she stared at the middle distance and felt the exact shape of what she was doing, not just what she was fighting, but what she was building, case by case, and testimony by testimony, and documented incident by documented incident, out of the wreckage of everything that had been blamed on her. It was going to cost her more. She knew that. The call to Thomas Webb would get back to Taft's people. The drive she'd handed Rourke would land on desks that would trigger responses she couldn't fully predict. Congressman Marsh had staffers and lawyers and 18 years of institutional insulation, and none of that was going to dissolve quietly because one handler, with an encrypted drive, had walked into an NCIS office. It was going to get worse before it got better. She had known that from the beginning. She had built for that. She clipped Rex's lead and walked back inside with her head up and her pace even, and she did not allow herself to think about worse, only about the next step, which was dinner, and after that sleep, and after that whatever came at 600 tomorrow. What came at 600 tomorrow was 2 uniformed MPs at her door and orders to report to Commander Hatch's office immediately for what the paperwork described in careful administrative language as a formal operational review. She read the paperwork once, set it on her bunk, looked at Rex. Okay, she said, here we go. She dressed in full uniform, because the way you walk into a room like that matters, and she was going to walk in looking like exactly what she was, the best handler in this unit, the most documented, the most prepared, and the last person on earth they should have put a gun to. She walked into Hatch's office at 06:03 and understood immediately that this was not a conversation, it was a tribunal. Hatch sat behind his desk in full dress uniform, which he never wore for administrative reviews, which told her someone had told him to wear it. On his left sat Colonel Warren Taft, the man whose name she had connected to 4 transfers and 6 years of institutional protection. On Taft's left sat a woman Maya didn't recognize, 40s sharp eyes, a JAG insignia that meant she was not Sharon Vega's ally. She was Sharon Vega's institutional opposite number. A lawyer who worked for the machine, not against it. On Hatch's right sat Dale Pruitt, not in restraints, not under escort, in uniform, hands folded on the table with the careful stillness of a man who has been coached overnight on exactly how to sit and exactly what expression to wear. Maya stood in the doorway for exactly 2 seconds, long enough to read the room completely, and then she walked in and sat down across from all of them and put her hands flat on the table and waited. Rex was not with her. They had specified in the paperwork that the K-9 was not authorized for this meeting. She had noted that. It was the kind of detail that told you what the other side was afraid of, and apparently they were afraid of a 74-pound German shepherd sitting quietly beside his handler, which told her they understood on some level what Rex's presence represented. Control, documentation, preparation, things they were about to try very hard to dismantle. Handler Carter, Hatch began, this review has been convened to address serious concerns regarding your conduct and the operational security implications of unauthorized recordings made within this facility. She looked at him without expression. I'd like my JAG representative present. Lieutenant Commander Vega has been notified. Is she in this building? A pause. She is en route. Then I'll wait. Maya folded her hands on the table, mirroring Pruitt's posture with the specific precision of someone who knows exactly what they're doing. I'm sure everyone understands the importance of proper legal representation in a formal review. Taft leaned forward slightly. He was a large man, the kind of large that comes from decades of physical authority and the expectation of deference. His voice when he spoke was the voice of someone who had not been told no in a very long time. Handler Carter, I want to be direct with you. What happened in this facility last night represents a serious breach of unit cohesion and operational. Colonel, she said it quietly, cleanly. I'm going to stop you there because I'm not going to participate in a characterization of last night's events before my representative is present. She looked at him steadily. And I think you know that anything said in this room before she arrives is going to create additional documentation problems for the people who are already facing significant documentation problems. Silence. Taft sat back. The JAG lawyer across the table was writing something on her notepad. Pruitt was looking at a fixed point on the wall somewhere above Maya's left shoulder with the expression of a man trying very hard to appear calm and achieving only the appearance of trying. Hatch said, we can wait. They waited 17 minutes. Maya spent them in silence. She was not performing composure. She was genuinely in it, the trained stillness that had gotten her through 8 years of missions and 18 months of institutional warfare and 2:17 in the morning with a gun barrel against her skull. She breathed. She read the room in micro increments. She watched Taft, who checked his phone twice and recrossed his legs once, which told her he was receiving updates from somewhere outside this room. She watched Pruitt, who did not move at all, which told her he had been very specifically instructed not to. Sharon Vega arrived at 0621 with a second person. Maya had not expected a civilian man in his 50s with a briefcase and the measured walk of someone who bills by the hour and has never once been hurried into a room in his life. Handler Carter. Sharon sat beside her. This is Alan Merritt. He'll be co-counseling. Taft looked at Merritt with an expression that lasted approximately 1 second before being replaced by his default command authority. But Maya caught at the recognition. Taft knew who Merritt was, and whatever that recognition meant, it had shifted something in the air in this room. Colonel, Merritt said pleasantly, setting his briefcase on the table. I appreciate you waiting. Shall we proceed? The review that followed was unlike anything Maya had been trained to anticipate, and she had anticipated a great deal. It lasted 4 hours and 11 minutes. In the first hour, Taft's team attempted to establish that Maya's recording violated operational security protocols and that her contact with NCIS constituted unauthorized disclosure of classified unit information. Merritt disassembled both arguments with the methodical patience of a man building with very precise tools, citing specific articles, specific precedents, specific language from the UC, MJ, that the other side's JAG attorney had clearly hoped she wouldn't have to face this morning. In the second hour, Pruitt gave his account of the previous night. He had clearly rehearsed it. He used words like escalated and perceived threat and emotional instability, and Maya sat through all of it with her hands flat on the table and her face completely still, because she knew Sharon knew Merritt knew, and the recording knew that every word Pruitt said was building a wall he was going to have to climb back over. Sergeant Pruitt, Merritt said when Pruitt finished, you've described the events of last night as a response to Handler Carter's provocative behavior. Is that accurate? Yes, sir. And the firearm. Pruitt's jaw tightened. I was carrying a standard sidearm. That you placed against Handler Carter's skull, Merritt said. Still pleasant. The pleasantness of someone holding all the cards and choosing not to display them yet. That's on the recording. The sound of metal contact followed by your voice, followed by her response. Very clear audio. He tilted his head slightly. Would you like to revise your characterization of the events? A sound came from Taft's side of the table. Not a word, more of a controlled exhale that wanted to be something louder. Pruitt said nothing. Merritt made a note, moved on. The third hour was when it broke open. Merritt placed a document on the table, slid it across to Taft, and said simply, "I'd like to discuss Operation Harrow." The temperature in the room changed. Hatch went very still. The JAG attorney across the table looked at the document, and then at Taft, and then at her notepad in a sequence that told Maya she was encountering something she hadn't been briefed to handle. Taft picked up the document, read the first page, and set it back down with a control that cost him something visible. "That document," he began, "is part of the NCIS case file that was formally opened at 04:12 this morning," Merritt said, "which Handler Carter is a cooperating witness in. Which means her protected status under witness cooperation protocols has been active since before this review was convened." He paused. "Which means this review, as currently structured, represents a potential violation of federal witness protection statutes." Sharon put a second document on the table. The JAG attorney across from them picked it up, read 3 lines, and said quietly, "Colonel, I need a moment with you." Taft stood. They stepped out. Pruitt sat at the table looking like a man watching his house burn down from a chair he couldn't get up from. Hatch looked at Maya for the first time in an hour, really looked at her. And what she saw in his face was not anger and not defiance. It was something closer to exhaustion. The specific exhaustion of a man who had known for a long time that the thing he was standing in the middle of was wrong and had chosen the path of least resistance over and over until the path had run out. "How long did you know?" she asked him, quietly. Just the two of them, functionally, with Pruitt a ghost at the end of the table. Hatch's mouth tightened. "Carter, not for the record. I'm asking you directly." She kept her voice even. "The files that disappeared, the kennel reports. You knew what Pruitt was doing. How long?" A long silence. Pruitt was looking at the wall again. "Since the second week," Hatch said. His voice was quiet and flat and old. She absorbed that. Didn't let it move through her yet. Filed it. "Did you know about Operation Harrow, about Marsh's involvement?" He looked at her. Something in his eyes that might have been the beginning of honesty arriving about 2 years too late. "I knew the official report on Harrow was incomplete." "Did you know it blamed me for a call I didn't make?" A pause that lasted exactly long enough to be an answer. "Yes," he said. She held his gaze for 3 full seconds. Then she looked away, because she had what she needed and she didn't want to give him the relief of her anger, because anger would have looked like vulnerability, and she had not survived this by being vulnerable in rooms like this. Taft and the JAG attorney came back in. Taft sat down. He was carrying himself differently, the authority still there but tighter, pressurized. The posture of a man who has just been told by his lawyer that the ground under him is thinner than he thought. "We'd like to propose an adjournment," the JAG attorney said, "to allow all parties to review the current scope of—" "No," Maya said. Everyone looked at her. Sharon put a hand on her arm, a light touch of question. Maya didn't move. "We're not adjourning," she said. "We're going to finish this today. Because I have been in this system for 18 months waiting for a room where the truth was on the table, and it's on the table right now, and I am not walking out of here and waiting another day for the people in this building to figure out how to put it back in a drawer." She looked at Taft directly. "Operation Harrow. Congressman Marsh's signature on the operational framework. Lieutenant Colonel Keyes's false after-action report. Sergeant Pruitt's conduct over the past 6 weeks, and specifically the events of 2/17 this morning. All of it is documented, transferred to NCIS, and it is not going back into a sealed file." She let that sit for one beat. "What I am offering is cooperation, my full cooperation with the NCIS investigation, my testimony, my documentation in exchange for the formal correction of my service record and the formal reopening of the Operation Harrow findings." "That's not something this review has authority to," Taft began. "I know," Maya said, "which is why I'm saying it to you instead of through you. Because what you can do, Colonel, is pick up the phone and call the people who have that authority and tell them that Handler Maya Carter is sitting in a room with enough documentation to make the next 6 months of their lives considerably more complicated than the next 6 minutes of this conversation." Taft stared at her. She stared back. And then something happened that Maya had not allowed herself to predict, because predicting it would have felt too much like hope. And she had protected herself from hope for a long time. Taft reached into his jacket pocket, took out his phone, and stood up and walked out of the room. Pruitt made a sound, half word, half exhale. He's not. Yes, he is, Merritt said mildly, making a note. The call lasted 11 minutes. Maya sat with her hands on the table and breathed and did not let her face do anything. Rex was in his kennel on the other side of this building, and she could feel his absence the way you feel the absence of something that has become structural, not painful, exactly just present. She thought about what she was going to say to him when this was over. Probably nothing. Probably she would just clip his lead and walk and let him do what he always did, which was understand without being told. Taft came back in, sat down, put his phone on the table face down. The JAG attorney said the Deputy Judge Advocate General's office has agreed to a preliminary hearing on the Operation Harrow findings. Timeline to be determined. Handler Carter's service record will be flagged for formal review pending the outcome. She was reading from notes she had taken during the 11 minutes. Notes that had come from wherever Taft's phone call had gone. Sergeant Pruitt will be placed on administrative suspension pending the criminal investigation into the events of this morning. Pruitt's chair scraped back. This is you can't, Sergeant, Taft said. One word, absolute and final. Pruitt went silent, but his hands on the table were shaking, and for the first time since Maya had arrived in this unit, Dale Pruitt looked exactly like what he was, a man whose protection had just been formally withdrawn. Sharon leaned close to Maya and said quietly, "You okay?" Maya thought about it honestly. She thought about Coda, about Marcus Webb and Darnell Pruitt, and a building in a country she still couldn't name, and 18 months of carrying a file that nobody wanted to touch. She thought about Thomas Webb at the dinner table, and his wife who had stopped speaking, and his daughter who had transferred colleges 3 times. "Not yet," she said, just as quietly. "But I'm getting there." The formal proceedings concluded at 10:47. Maya walked out of the building into the open air and stopped and just breathed for a moment, the specific involuntary breath of someone who has been holding something for a very long time. Her phone buzzed. Rourke. She picked up. "We've confirmed Marsh's signature is authentic," he said without preamble. "We're moving to subpoena his office records by end of week. Keyes has been notified that he's a person of interest and has already lawyered up, which is its own kind of confirmation." A pause. "You did good today, Carter." "What about the 4 women before me?" she said. "We're in contact with 3. The 4th has declined to participate, which is her right." His voice was careful. "Their records are part of the review." She stood with that for a moment. 3 of the 4, 3 other women whose careers had been quietly crushed by the same machine and who were now going to have their names attached to something real instead of something buried. "Good," she said. She went to get Rex. He was in his kennel when she arrived, and his reaction when she opened the gate was not the dramatic physical joy of a home, reunited with its person after a long separation. It was something quieter and more specific than that. He walked out, pressed his shoulder against her leg, and looked up at her for exactly 3 seconds, with the absolute attention that had always felt to her less like a dog looking at a handler and more like one person looking at another and saying, "I see you, I'm here. Whatever happened in there, we're still in it together." She knelt down and put both hands on his face and looked at him. "Okay, Rex," she said. "The next part is going to be harder." He held her gaze, steady, unafraid. She had not been wrong about what was coming. The preliminary hearing was going to be brutal. Marsh's lawyers would be the most expensive in Washington. Keyes would construct an alternate account with the precision of a man who had spent 18 years navigating institutional cover, and Taft, suspended or not, would not disappear quietly. The machine that had buried 4 women and 1 mission and 2 operators in a K9 named Coda had not been dismantled this morning. It had been cracked. The light was getting in, but there was still a long way between light getting in and the whole structure coming down. She knew that. She had built for that. She stood up, clipped Rex's lead, and walked out into the afternoon. She had calls to make to Sharon, to Rourke, to Thomas Webb, who deserved to know what had happened in that room today. She had documents to organize and testimony to prepare, and a service record that had been wrong for 18 months and was now formally moving toward being corrected. She had work to do. But for this moment, walking across the lot with Rex's paw falls steady, and even beside her, Maya Carter, let herself feel the specific, careful warmth of something she had not allowed herself in a very long time. Not victory, Not yet, but the first real evidence that victory was possible. And for a woman who had built everything, she was out of discipline and documentation and the absolute refusal to stop moving forward, that was enough. That was more than enough. She took the next step, then the one after that. Rex walked beside her like he always had, calm, certain, and completely unafraid of what was waiting at the end of the road. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday in November, 6 weeks after the morning. Maya walked out of Hatch's office with Rex at her heel, and the first real evidence that the truth had somewhere to go. 6 weeks sounds like a long time until you're living inside them. Then they move like water fast in some places, brutally slow in others, and always with the sense that something underneath the surface is moving faster than what you can see. Marsh's legal team filed 3 motions to delay in the first 2 weeks alone. Keyes gave a statement through his attorney characterizing the NCIS investigation as politically motivated, a phrase so precisely calibrated to the current media environment that Maya read it and actually felt a cold kind of admiration for whoever had written it. Taft, on administrative suspension, had apparently spent his first week of freedom making phone calls because by day 10, she was getting secondhand reports of pressure being applied to 2 members of the review panel from the direction of people whose names she recognized from defense appropriations records. The machine was fighting back. She had known it would. What she hadn't fully anticipated was how public it would become. The story broke on a Thursday, not from NCIS, not from Sharon's office, not from anyone Maya had spoken to. It came from Thomas Webb, who had given a 20-minute interview to a journalist he trusted on the record about his son and the dinner table that had gone quiet, and the 18 months his family had spent directing their grief at the wrong person. He hadn't named Maya specifically. He hadn't needed to. The journalist had done that work herself, and by Friday morning the story had a shape that the internet recognized immediately and could not stop sharing. Maya found out when Sharon called at 06:14. "It's out," Sharon said. Maya sat on the edge of her bunk. Rex lifted his head. "How bad?" "It's not bad," Sharon said, and her voice had something in it that Maya needed a second to identify as carefully contained relief. "It's accurate." Webb was careful. The journalist was careful. "It's Maya, it's the truth. Just the truth, presented cleanly." A pause. Rourke is managing the NCIS side. They're not pleased about the timing, but they're not obstructed either. The documentation stands regardless of the press cycle. And Marsh, his office released a statement at midnight, denies any unauthorized involvement in classified operations. Standard language. Another pause. His approval rating dropped 11 points between midnight and 6 a.m. Maya looked at Rex. Rex looked back at her. "Okay," she said, "there's something else." Sharon's voice shifted, careful now. The voice she used when she was delivering information she wasn't sure how Maya would receive. "Marcus Webb's wife called Rourke's office yesterday. She wants to testify formally at the hearing." Maya closed her eyes for exactly 3 seconds. She thought about a woman who had stopped speaking at dinner tables, about the specific courage it takes to walk into an official proceeding and put your grief on the record when the institution that caused it is the same one running the room. "Good," Maya said. Her voice came out rougher than she intended. She didn't fix it. "That's good. There's a third thing. Sharon. Lieutenant Colonel Keyes asked for a meeting, with you specifically, through proper channels, through merit. He's not requesting immunity, and he's not requesting leniency. A beat. He's requesting a conversation." The silence that followed lasted long enough that Rex stood up and pressed against her leg. "Set it up," Maya said. She met Raymond Keyes in a conference room at the JAG offices on a Wednesday afternoon with Merritt present and a recording running with Keyes' full knowledge and written consent. Keyes looked like a man who had spent 6 weeks not sleeping. He was still straight back, still carrying himself with the residue of 18 years of command authority, but it sat differently on him now, the way a coat sits on someone who has lost weight, slightly wrong, slightly too large. He sat down across from her, and for a moment he just looked at her, like he was trying to locate something. "I gave you that order," he said. No preamble, no lawyer's construction, just the words placed on the table between them, like something he'd been carrying and had finally put down. "I told you to move Coda into the Eastern Corridor. The report said you acted without authorization." "That was false. I wrote it false." Maya held his gaze. Her hands were flat on the table and completely still. "Why are you telling me this now?" Because Thomas Webb gave that interview, Keyes said. And I heard it, and I sat in my car in my driveway for 40 minutes afterward, and I thought about Webb and Pruitt, and I thought about you in that hospital, and I thought about the thing I wrote. He stopped. His jaw moved. I have 3 daughters. One of them wants to go to the Naval Academy. He looked at the table. I couldn't look at that and keep going the way I was going. The mission framework, Maya said. Marsh's involvement, you knew. I knew he had input on the strategic parameters. I was told it was an advisory capacity. I didn't push because I had been very clearly informed that pushing would end certain things for me. He looked up. That is not an excuse. I want to be clear that I am not offering it as one. What are you offering? My full testimony. Everything I know about Marsh's role, Taft's role, the specific chain of decisions that led to the Harrow framework. The names of the other officers who were present when those decisions were made and who signed off without objection. He paused. It's not going to be comfortable for some significant people. No, Maya agreed, it isn't. Will it be enough? He asked it with the rawness of someone who genuinely doesn't know and genuinely needs to. She thought about Marcus Webb, about Coda, about 18 months of a service record with the wrong name attached to the wrong call. For the record, yes. For Marcus Webb's family, that's not mine to answer. Keyes nodded. He reached into the folder in front of him and slid a document across the table. This is my sworn statement. I had it prepared before I came in. His voice was level, but the effort it took to keep it level was visible. And Maya found she did not need to harden herself against it the way she had hardened herself against everything else in this building for 6 weeks. I wanted you to see it before it went anywhere official. I owed you that much. She looked at the document, read the first page, the second. It was thorough, it was damaging, and it was true. She could feel the truth of it the way you feel the truth of something you already know and have been waiting for someone else to finally say. She slid it back. Give it to Rourke. The hearing convened on a Tuesday at 900 and lasted 3 days. Maya testified for 4 hours on the first day. She had testified before boards of inquiry, operational reviews, the kind of institutional proceedings that are designed to be exhausting so that people stop pursuing them. She knew how to sit in that chair and deliver information in the clean, precise language of someone who has organized their truth carefully and is not going to be moved from it. What she hadn't anticipated was how it would feel to do it publicly, with Webb's wife in the gallery, with journalists outside the building, and Sharon at her left and Merritt at her right, and Rex because Merritt had argued successfully for his presence as a documented service animal at her feet. She hadn't anticipated that it would feel like something being set down that she had carried so long, she had stopped noticing the weight of it. Keyes testified on the second day. His testimony lasted 6 hours, and at several points, the proceedings had to pause while the panel reviewed documents that were being introduced for the first time. Maya was not in the room for his testimony. Witnesses were sequestered, but Sharon came out at the lunch break and sat beside her in the hallway and said very quietly, "He's telling it all. Everything. There are names in there I wasn't expecting." Marsh, Maya said of Marsh. 3 members of Marsh's staff. 2 other officers who were at the planning table for Harrow. She paused. And 1 name that's going to create a separate investigation. Maya looked at her. Sharon shook her head slightly. Not here, not yet. Maya understood, filed it, kept breathing. On the 3rd day, the panel deliberated for 2 hours and 20 minutes. Maya spent them in a side room with Rex sitting on the floor with her back against the wall because the chairs in the room were uncomfortable and she was done performing comfort she didn't feel. Rex put his head in her lap. She put both hands on him and sat with the specific quality of waiting that she had gotten very good at, not passive, not anxious, just present, alert, ready for whatever direction the next thing came from. Merritt came in at 1,347. He sat down on the floor beside her, which she had not expected from a man who billed by the hour and wore suits that cost more than her monthly housing allowance. He sat down and looked at her and said, "The panel has accepted Keyes' testimony in full. Harrow is being formally reopened as a command investigation with criminal referral to the Department of Justice." He paused. "Your service record will be corrected. The handler error citation is being formally withdrawn and replaced with a commendation for conduct under hostile conditions." She stared at the wall across from her. Carter. I heard you, she said. Her voice was steady and very quiet. Marsh is being referred to the House Ethics Committee and the DOJ simultaneously. Keyes is cooperating on a formal agreement. Pruitt's court-martial has been separately scheduled. He let that land. Then, you won. She thought about Coda. She thought about him the way she always thought about him, not the ending, but the work. The way he moved through a space confident and sure and completely trusting of the person on the other end of his lead. She thought about Marcus Webb and Darnell Pruitt and the families that had been handed wrong answers and told to grieve accordingly. The families, she said, are being formally notified today. The correction to the Harrow findings will include a statement that the operational failure was the result of command-level decisions, not handler conduct. Merritt looked at her. It won't give them their people back. No, she said, but it gives them the right name on the wrong thing. That matters. She paused. It matters more than most people who haven't needed it understand. Merritt nodded. He stood up, brushed off his suit, and extended a hand. She took it and stood, and Rex stood with her, and the three of them walked out of that room and down the hall toward whatever the rest of the day held. Marcus Webb's wife found her in the corridor outside the proceedings room. Her name was Diane. She was smaller than Maya had imagined, compact, precise with the eyes of someone who had done an enormous amount of living in a short number of years. She was with a woman Maya assumed was a friend who stayed 2 steps back with the instinct of someone who understands when a moment needs space. Diane looked at Maya for a long moment. Neither of them spoke first. That was the thing about certain kinds of grief and certain kinds of truth. Sometimes the language for them is just the looking. Just the acknowledgement of another person who was in the same fire from different directions and came out knowing the same thing. My husband told me what you said to him on the phone, Diane said finally, about Marcus. She stopped. Her jaw tightened and released. He said you described how Marcus moved that night. He said you, she stopped again. Nobody else described how he moved. They just described what went wrong. Maya felt something in her chest that she had kept very carefully closed for 18 months open just slightly. He was good, she said. He was really good at what he did, and he trusted the chain of command because he had earned the right to trust it, and the chain of command failed him. That is the truth, and I'm sorry it took this long to be the official truth. Diane reached out and put her hand briefly on Maya's arm. Just briefly. Just enough. Thank you for coming back, she said. For making them put the right name on it. She walked away with her friend, and Maya stood in the corridor and breathed, and Rex pressed against her leg, and she let herself feel the full weight of it, the grief and the relief and the long exhaustion of having been exactly right for 18 months about something that should never have been wrong in the first place. She had 3 calls to make before the day was out. Sharon first to go over the next steps on Pruitt's court-martial and the DOJ referral timeline. Rourke second because the name Sharon hadn't said into the hallway was apparently the beginning of a separate thread that was going to require its own careful handling. And Thomas Webb third because he had started this week of truth with his interview, and he deserved to hear what that had helped move. She made the calls. She answered every question directly and completely, and without the protective distance she had maintained for so long that it had started to feel like her natural register. Something had changed today, not in the facts, not in the work still ahead, but in the specific gravity of how she carried herself through it. 6 days later, the formal offer arrived through Merritt. A position. Not a return to field operations, the offer was more specific than that, and when she read it, she understood that someone had thought carefully about who she was and what she had just spent 2 years demonstrating. Director of a newly established K-9 handler training program at the Naval Special Warfare Center. Full rank reinstatement. Development authority over the curriculum, the selection process, the standards. The mandate stated plainly in the offer letter was to build something that had not existed before in this specific form, a program that trained handlers not just in technical execution, but in exactly the qualities that the system had spent years trying to eliminate from Maya Carter without ever understanding that those qualities were the point. Documentation, integrity, the understanding that real control is not domination, it is precision, patience, and the willingness to stand inside the fire and not move until you're sure. She read the offer twice, set it down, looked at Rex. What do you think? She said. Rex looked at her with the absolute uncomplicated attention that had been for 2 years the most honest thing in her life. She picked up the pen. 3 months later, she stood in front of the first cohort, 12 handlers, men and women young enough that some of them still had the slightly stunned look of people who don't yet know what they're capable of. Rex walked beside her in the way he always walked, not performing anything, not projecting anything, simply present and certain and completely without fear of whatever came next. She looked at them for a moment. 12 people at the beginning of something. 12 people who are going to learn in this program that the most powerful thing a handler can develop is not aggression and not toughness, but the specific disciplined confidence of someone who has done the work so completely that they don't need to prove it. Rex was in a building when it fell, she said. No preamble, no welcome. He came out. Not because he was the biggest animal in there, not because he was the most aggressive, not because he was lucky. She paused. Because he trusted his training, trusted his handler, and never once confused fear with weakness or silence with surrender. She let that settle. That's what we're building here. That's the standard. Everything else follows from it. One of the recruits, a young woman front row, the specific posture of someone who is working hard to appear less nervous than she has raised her hand. What happened to the handler? The one who was with him in the building. Maya looked at her, held her gaze for exactly a beat. She's standing in front of you. Silence. Rex pressed his shoulder against the back of Maya's knee and looked out at the 12 faces in front of them, steady and unblinking and completely unimpressed by anything that wasn't real. And Maya Carter stood in the truth she had fought 18 months to make official in the program she had been given the authority to build because she had refused to be erased, and she understood cleanly, completely, without any need to say it out loud, that she had not survived in spite of what she was. She had survived because of it, and she was done letting anyone tell her otherwise.